Hi, I'm James, and in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about different options for asset class diversification. So in my recent video on modern portfolio theory and asset class diversification, I outlined why it's important, but I didn't really give examples of what different asset classes and how we might look to invest in those different asset classes. All right, let's go. Okay, so before we jump in, just want to say, I'm not saying go out and invest in any of these asset classes. This is more to give you some ideas and inspiration on where you might look and how you might go about diversifying the different asset classes you're investing in, if that's something that you want to do. Okay, so starting in the stock market and the equity space, I'm going to first talk about different ways we can diversify in terms of different sectors. So basically what this means is different areas that companies operate within society. So not geographically necessarily, so as in not in different states or areas of the country, but instead the different kind of industries or sectors that they operate in. So some examples of that are as follows. Now we have, say, the retail sector, where you might find things like clothes retailers, fashion, things like beauty and cosmetics. We could also see things like furniture and homewares retailers, which have done really well in the current environment where there's been shifts toward online shopping and people are spending more time at home. So the retail sector has actually boomed, particularly in Australia, over the past 6 months since March. So we could also look to a different sector like the energy sector. So you might be looking at different energy companies, maybe some renewable energies companies if that's something you're interested in. And there are many different elements of that energy sector as well, which could also include resources. So maybe the companies that produce the resources that fuel the energy sector, like mining companies, for example. And then another example, the third that I'll give, is the financial services sector. So this one's really big in Australia on the Australian Stock Exchange because we've got a large market share within our stock market is held by the big banks. So in the financial services sector, you could be looking at companies like I personally invest in ANZ. You could be looking at smaller ones like Bendigo Bank, for example. Or, you've also got in this financial services space, companies like, drumroll, Afterpay. And they operate in the financial services space, but they're all kind of providing different products. Well, this one is to the banks, but still within the same sector. Okay, so I've talked about different sectors, but what about diversification within the same sector? Now, I'll use technology as an example to kind of demonstrate how this works and how you could think about it. So you might be quite interested in tech stocks because you've seen that technology is quite disruptive, it's changing the way that we do things, and you believe that, technology is the future. Well, if you're looking to invest in tech stocks and you want to include some diversification within the tech sector, what you might think about is different kinds of tech companies in terms of what they offer. So some examples of this could be software companies that sell a particular software to users. Or you might think of hardware manufacturing companies, those that instead of focusing on the software layer, they actually build the hardware that the software is used on. You might also think about maybe the data centers. Now we're moving towards like a cloud computing focused sort of orientation, the way that our businesses operate, and we're all working from home remotely. So you might like, the cloud computing space seems interesting. Maybe I could invest in some data centers that actually own the infrastructure that data centers, the demand for data centers will benefit from. And an example of that I personally don't hold, but I will be investing in at some point, is NXT. All right, so that's different sectors and within sectors, but now let's talk about different geographies. So you might look to diversify still within stocks in different areas of the world. So you might have some exposure to the Australian stock market, maybe with an index fund or individual stocks like me in my case. And you might also want to get some exposure to the United States market. So you might look to invest in equities that operate in the United States, or you might see some growth areas, perhaps overseas in Asia, particularly in something like India. Now, I'll leave a link to my friend Michael's channel.
So this is Michael's channel here. Now I'll leave a link up on the screen here to his India ETF review video. But basically what you can see is he reviews ETFs and he's got his own framework for actually reviewing these. And so if you're looking at diversifying into different markets, well, you know, using ETFs could be a really good option to do that. And Michael's channel is a great place to start if you want some ideas and if you want to have you know, a bit of a framework of how you might think about analyzing and assessing these ETFs.
Okay, so finally, when it comes to asset class diversification, I'm going to talk you through my two favorite at the moment. And these are, one, the commodities and precious metals space, which is owning things like gold and silver, uranium, all these kinds of commodities and you know, resources that aren't necessarily companies, but they're things that have a particular utility and use across our broader society. So you can get exposure to these asset classes in two different ways. One, by owning the companies that actually go out and mine, you know, and harvest those commodities. And, you know, that's still giving you exposure to the equities market if you're going that route. Or you can buy, say, ETFs or the physical commodities like gold, silver bars. I don't, but you could. So then you get exposure, instead of the risks associated with that company, you get exposure to just the price of the actual asset itself. So for example, gold, as we've seen, has been a very popular asset class this year. Now finally, probably the most controversial and my favorite of the alternate asset classes to invest in, and that is the cryptocurrency space. So even within the cryptocurrency space, there are different kinds of like sectors that operate, different startups, different tokens that offer different utilities, that do different things, that have different demand and supply factors, which all can give you the opportunity to not only diversify across asset classes, but diversify within that asset class. So just to give you a few examples, Bitcoin is the most popular and the most obvious. So it has the largest market cap of the entire crypto space. And you know, I personally hold that. And then you kind of go down the list and there are some others as well. So, you know, the next one that comes to mind would be Ethereum, which is the number 2 of the market cap in the crypto space, but it's very different to Bitcoin. And I won't go too much into it, but they're fundamentally two very different technologies, two very different things. And the only thing they really have in common is that they're both in the crypto space. And then finally, the third example is Chainlink. Now I own all 3 of these, just as a disclaimer, but Chainlink's one that's done very well this year because they're solving a different problem and they're doing something different in the space. So they help blockchains get data from the real world when they want it and make sure that it's reliable and accurate. Now, if you know much about the world of technology, data has been referred to as the new oil because it's become this very valuable thing. As we've seen with Facebook and Google collecting data, they're able to sell that to companies and use it to monetize and advertise and do all sorts of interesting things. So, this is just an example of different asset class diversification within a different alternative asset class, which is the crypto asset space. Okay, that's it from me today. Just wanted to make this video to give you some ideas of ways that you can go about diversifying into different asset classes to, hopefully, as I talked about in that last video, improve the risk-adjusted return of our portfolios. All right, thanks for watching. Give it a like if you enjoyed it, and I'll speak to you soon. Cheers.